Callisto Protocol deserves a better reception. The spiritual successor to Dead Space seemed to build up some hype, which then crashed after launch due to rage quit videos and mixed reviews emerging. What is it about? Innovative at the time, especially in UI and setting, the space terror Dead Space became for many the next cult classic after Resident Evil 4, which released a few years earlier, and reinvented action horror with the shoulder perspective. EA then mismanaged the series. First with multiplayer and microtransactions, then the responsible Visceral Games was supposed to develop Star Wars titles but was shut down. So Dead Space co-inventor Glenn Schofield came up with the quasi-successor Callisto Protocol. I admit I was ready to say that the game wouldn't feel quite right without the necromorphs or the tool designs from Dead Space, but far from it. Space Prison Callisto has once again succeeded in creating a convincing horror world. The technical power behind it was impressive for a 2022 game, but even more so was the art direction, which will likely make the game look good forever, just like Dead Space. It covers all the classics: cold steel, rusty pipes, shooting steam, flickering holograms. Only the monster designs are kinda lame, and the death animations are a bit childish. On the other hand, the developers have found countless ways to make the steel corridors surprisingly varied. The lighting alone creates many memorable backdrops. The sound is just as great, the music is atmospheric but not intrusive, and there always seems to be something unpleasant lurking between the walls. Jumpscare sounds are a little reduced compared to Dead Space and are most noticeable in the story sequences, which are also thankfully restrained compared to the gameplay. Especially in survival horror, it is important that the gameplay interaction is big. Cutscenes are not thrilling due to the lack of interaction. The story wasn't spectacular enough for some, but as a backdrop for the great atmosphere, this Resident Evil type plot was good enough.
Experimenting on the prisoners.
Even more since you can't expect a narrative masterpiece like Silent Hill 2 from this team, I think. Even Dead Space didn't do much with its hints of psychological horror. The criticism that appeared in many reviews, that it's just a repackaged Dead Space, is weak in my opinion. Of course there are parallels, but Prison on the Ice Planet is clearly not the world of Dead Space, despite the same inspirations like Alien, Event Horizon, etc. And as much as innovative settings are appreciated, the last Dead Space game was almost 10 years old at the release of Callisto, the last good one, part 2 even older. Callisto did not have to reinvent the wheel, but first rebuild the old pile of rubble. Not to mention that Callisto Protocol was surprisingly fresh in terms of gameplay. And that brings us to the big crux. I won't lie, I didn't understand the game at first. In the first encounter with multiple enemies I was stuck for half an hour. The new dodging system seemed to demand reflexes that made even Sekiro feel lenient. Missed the timing twice and it was game over. The real problem though, the game does not explain the core mechanics well. Intuition led many to assume that dodging maneuvers like the short button press in action games like Bayonetta should be timed correctly. Instead though, you have to counterintuitively hold your stick in one direction completely without timing and then move to counter. But I wouldn't blame the backlash against the game solely on the poor tutorial. I think some people forgot that games used to have learning curves too, and don't automatically have to play like Uncharted when they have a shoulder perspective. Yes, Callisto looks like it should be played like Dead Space. However, it's more like brute survival horror, with an extreme focus on melee combat. Firearms are therefore not many, and they are more like bonus attacks and finishing moves. The combat mechanics seem odd, but before you know it, you're naturally dodging surprise attacks and busting out instant kills and well done levitation attacks. The game does have its problems though, yes. Bosses are few and far between, rather bad, and combined with the abstruse saving system, they mess up the final stretch of the campaign. Dead Space also had a low point of frustration with the asteroid minigame, but at least it wasn't at the end. Also, standard enemies become too repetitive. It could have been shorter in general, or the final stretch could have been deleted altogether. On the other hand, even as a survival horror veteran, this brute force survival horror concept was quite refreshing, and getting used to this unfamiliar approach was all the more motivating. And although the weak tutorial is a problem, it's also pleasant that the game does not hold your hands, neither in battles nor in exploration. Sometimes a wayfinder from that space would have been helpful, but generally the level design in Callisto is good. Linear, but with the right amount of optional secret paths and typical keycard puzzles to have some cool time. Even with the right mindset you can still die several times, but that's how it should be in survival horror. As typical for the genre, you have to learn to use resources and opportunities correctly. But here with much more focus on the environment than on ammunition. And on how to dispatch enemies one by one before they become groups or mutate, which adds enormous pressure. It's this unexpected focus and of course the grandiose backdrops that made this game more exciting than a new Dead Space game from this particular team might have been.